Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Discovery Season 3, Episode 3, People of Earth. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Discovery, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Season 3, Episode 3. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, I think this episode is good. I liked it probably just as much as last week's episode, maybe a tad bit more. But the main takeaway I got from this episode is I'm very interested in what they're setting up for. Which, as I talked about in the Season 3 premiere, that they're basically the show's having to reinvent itself. Now, in that premiere, I wasn't too impressed with what it was inventing, and I didn't think it was doing a good enough job of laying the groundwork for reinventing itself and setting up a new story. That I think was done best in this episode. But you actually need the premiere and the second episode. You need those two in order to lay the groundwork for this episode. Like, you can't have this episode be the premiere because that would be jumping in too quick. So in retrospect, it's actually a decent structure. It's a good structure the way they structured the season. I just, those first two episodes are a necessity. I just don't think they were that amazing. And then again, the first episode I still have some issues with being too Star Wars-like and too, fast-paced or whatnot. But that's neither here nor there. They kind of needed to set the structure to set up. And I'm actually glad, because I heard some people say that they wish that they dragged out that Discovery and Burnham being apart longer for more episodes. I am so glad they did. I am eternally grateful they did. In fact, I even pointed out that I thought even 2 episodes was too much. I thought that they should have intercut between, they could be separate. Like Burnham and Discovery could be separate, but I thought they should have intercut between them. But then again, that wouldn't make much sense if there's a year apart, whatever. But they could play with time. They've done that before. But regardless, not here to talk about the first 2 episodes. I'm here to talk about this third episode where they go to Earth. And I actually love that. I love how they don't beat around the bush. And they look, we got a spore drive. We want to find out what's going on, what happened to the Federation, what's the deal with the burn. So why don't we go to the heart of the Federation first? Let's go directly to Earth. Now, usually in terms of storytelling, they wouldn't do that because they would have to prolong things to keep it going. But the show found another way to prolong things and keep it going, and that is Earth isn't actually the center of the Federation anymore, and it's not where they'll find answers, that they didn't really find any answers anymore. So that way they could go to Earth first, but still not have any finding the answers, so they could prolong the mystery and the storyline for the rest of the season, which is decent. I like that. I thought it was pretty interesting. I thought it was an interesting dynamic that they have, I can't remember what they called themselves. It was the Earth Security Protectorate or whatever the hell they were, where Earth pretty much became isolationists, which I actually think makes a lot of sense in the universe of Star Trek. And it's not in line with Roddenberry's vision, but it's very much in line with our Stephen Barrett's vision. And I'm a huge Deep Space Nine fan, although many times I disagree with Iron Stephen Barrett, particularly his mythical Season 8 Deep Space Nine, which I thought was horseshit, but as far as his vision of Star Trek goes. But his sort of, what Deep Space Nine often preached a lot was that, Earth's a paradise, everyone loves Earth, but what would happen if that was suddenly threatened, suddenly taken away? There's that explored in that episode Homefront, and Paradise Lost, where the Dominion were threatening to, they did terrorist attacks on Earth, so everyone lost their shit, and they were more becoming sort of isolationists on Earth. So actually, that kind of fits, I think, that if, the Federation fell apart and all the starships just exploded and there was all of a sudden like chaos in the galaxy and nothing to protect them from the chaos, and Earth was still this perfect paradise, they would put a shield around it and just consolidate everything, and they're like, let's protect this paradise by being isolationist and attack anyone who tries to fuck with our shit. It's kind of another way to look at it is like a zombie apocalypse, Walking Dead type scenario, where you always have these apocalypse scenarios where the world ends and everyone's in disarray. If someone has a lot of food or storage of weapons or a lot of supplies, they often hunker down, build up defenses and protect it, and they are weary of anyone else who comes along, because there's a lot of starving, needy people, and a lot of those people are very violent and wanting supplies. So it's kind of that post-apocalypse type scenario. In fact, the whole premise of this 31st century or 30th century setup that we have is a post-apocalypse world, which I actually think is a pretty fascinating. I actually am interested in this setup. I think it's probably the only way they could have gone, because if they just went with a sort of continuing with the what we saw of the 30th century with Daniels and whatnot, I think it was the 29th century, but whatever, far future, then it would, here's this utopian and Starfleet so much better and more advanced. There's not really much place it could have gone story-wise. I mean, Discovery just would have been a relic, and everyone would just, it would just be a fascination, like a nostalgia trip. Where here, it's Discovery bears a lot more symbolism and is a lot more significant, because of the fact that it represents a time that no longer exists, and in fact is fighting to bring that, and it's very symbolic to those who are fighting to bring that time back. And I do like how in this episode that Burnham kind of resigned herself to fight in this time period. Like, I love how they're not like, we got to get back to our own time. Like, they pretty much already resigned themselves to stay in this time period and take up the fight of reforming the Federation, which I think is kind of, I did like how this episode did deal emotionally with like Tilly talking about how she'll never see her mother again, and everyone who goes to that tree at Starfleet Academy saying how they've all resigned themselves that they're not going back, which in a typical Star Trek show is not what happened. If a ship went into the far future, the whole episode would be about how they get back. They'd be, we got to get back to our time. We got to get back to our time. That's because it would be an episode in the show, and obviously the show couldn't take place in this century. They need to get back so they can continue having their weekly adventures. Where in this show, they purposely want to change the time frame to be in the far future, because so it will stop fucking with canon. And so it's kind of contrived in that way that the characters instantly resolve themselves to wanting to stay here instead of looking for ways to get back to their own home. It's like if Voyager went into the Delta Quadrant, and then once they were like, it's too far away to get home, so let's just make a home for ourselves here. Which actually would have been an interesting way to go. But it doesn't, I don't know if it necessarily fits with the characters, but it makes for more interesting storytelling, so I'm actually glad they're going that way, even if it does seem a bit contrived. But as I said, at least the characters are dealing with the fact that they'll never see their loved ones and family again. Now, as for this episode itself, we meet an interesting new character whose name I have yet to I remember. Hold on. I'm always looking up names during my reviews now. Adira. Is that how you say? I think that's how you say. I think that's how they were saying her name, Adira. And it was I don't know. This is kind of a hokey Discovery introduction to this character, but it's an interesting character. I didn't know that she was only 16 years old. Which is going to be interesting. And then they dropped a big sort of revelation at the end of the episode that she's actually the admiral they were looking for, because she's carrying a trill. And it's an interesting sort of tidbit that Discovery and Burnham had no idea what trills are, which is kind of. I feel like they're wanting to respect canon of the TNG episode, The Host, where they meet Odan and none Enterprise never had any idea what trills are. But I think the canon is already muddled. And as far as the trills go, because I talked about this in Deep Space Nine, they should have just renamed the species. Because Dax talks about Curzon. Curzon was around in like Discovery time period, I believe, and people seem to be well aware that Curzon was a symbiont. So the DS9 already contradicted the TNG continuity. So I think they should have just kept with the DS9 continuity, where Discovery would know what trills are and full on with symbionts, but instead they tried to respect the Host, the TNG continuity, which I actually wish they would have gotten rid of. Because they contradicted that. I mean, they had bumps on their foreheads. The whole episode, they should have called the species something else. But anyway, so what I'm saying is the continuity is already muddled, and that they should have just forgot about it instead of trying to respect it. But whatever, because they still had to work around with the sphere data that told them the truth about trills. Which reminds me that they have this sphere data, which was took out of the 22nd or the 23rd century, therefore it doesn't fuck with canon anymore. But now they still have this magical storytelling device, which could work as a cheat in many storytelling instances, because they have basically all of the knowledge in the universe, or at least up to the 23rd century. So they could use that for a lot of Deus Ex Machinas or easy fixes. So I forgot about that, and I was reminded. I was like, wait a second. Hopefully they won't rely on that too much, but then if they don't rely on that too much, then you could get a lot of storytelling issues where they'd be like, well, why didn't they just look at the sphere data? This could have solved this issue. So it's kind of problematic having it there at all, but whatever. Anyway, but so yeah. So it was an interesting, so the character was interesting. That set up that she's a human, but carrying a Trill symbiont, because we saw that was possible in the episode The Host, was interesting. Although that was, in that case, it was only temporary. Like, Riker had to get rid of it as soon as possible. But then again, this is the 30th century, so they probably found some medical technologies advanced that allowed them to actually stay. So that makes perfectly sense. That all jives for me. So yeah, let's get to the plot with Wynn. And when they said Wynn, I'm like, is it Kai Wynn? My mind just went there immediately, but of course has nothing to do with that, just a coincidence. But anyway, this villain is like raiding all the ships and stealing dilithium from Earth, and it's like all these villains. And as soon as they showed him on the screen, and it was like this weird looking bug-eyed thing, my mind immediately went to, that's a helmet, and someone is wearing a helmet, and it's going to be revealed who that someone is. Now, my mind didn't immediately go to human being, but I wasn't too shocked when that was the revelation. I'm like, oh yeah, that tracks. But in fact, like, if my mind tried to think of it as it's not a helmet, it's just actually what the alien looks like, it wouldn't, my mind rejected that thought, like, constantly. Like, I couldn't think of it as, oh, this is just an alien. My mind constantly was telling me, this is a helmet, and we're going to find out who's underneath. So that was kind of predictable when that happened. And there was this actor who, character actor I've seen in a lot of other sci-fi shows, mainly those filmed in Canada, like Stargate SG-1, X-Files, Stargate Atlantis. I think he's been in a lot of things. I've seen him pop up in bit parts here and there. So I was like, hey, it's that guy. But anyway, so yeah, it was an interesting, if not a bit contrived concept that these terrorists who were terrorizing Earth and trying to steal all the resource were actually humans on a colony on Titan that were abandoned after and because Earth were so fearful of everyone. It's like that whole Walking Dead post-apocalyptic scenario where you attack anyone who tries to approach you because you're afraid they'll steal your resources. But what if they're just helpless, defenseless people, and your people that you're abandoning? And so, Saru sort of and Burnham work together to negotiate a peace. Which, this episode is all like, that's all like, oh, we're a Starfleet. So it's kind of typical. I think that's the word I'm looking for. And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. I mean, it can't be great. Like, it's not astounding. It's like, yeah, this is the typical Star Trek episode, but then there's nothing wrong with having a typical Star Trek episode in Discovery. I think Discovery doesn't have very many of those. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just can't be a great thing either. It's good. I liked it. Anyway, so that was all decent. The one thing I want to talk about is how they had that contrived moment of who's going to be the captain of Discovery. Now, this is something I played up in interviews and whenever there's a panel or whatever. Oh, and Alex Kurtzman, whenever they talked about it in interviews or whatever, they always talk about, who's going to be the captain of Discovery? Who is going to be? Who is going to be? It's going to be Saru. Come on, obviously. In fact, I felt like Burnham was kind of a surrogate for the audience when she was like, well, it's you, obviously, come on, because that's what we're thinking. That's what I was thinking anyway. I'm like, don't even try to tease us with like, oh no, who's gonna be the captain? You don't know. It's fucking Saru, obviously. Come on, it's not even a thing. Like, I wish they didn't even take that much time to address it, but whatever. Other thing is, and this is something that Discovery, an issue I had with Discovery in Season 2, which they're not moving past here, because I really am still hopeful that Season 3 of Discovery will be much like Season 3 of other shows in the past, like Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, which is where the show got like a billion times better. I'm still hopeful that could be the case. I haven't ruled it out yet, but it hasn't happened yet either. Because it still has this issue where the characters are being way too melodramatic, which reminded me of the worst parts of season 2. Now, I just watched a review where someone praised this and saying that the characters are wearing their emotions on their sleeves and not being all like guarded like most Star Trek characters are, which is all well and good, but they're too melodramatic to the point where I do not buy it, where I don't find it realistic that people in real life would act that way. It seems more like contrived writing that are trying to get their audience to get all emotional rather than the way people would actually behave, if you know what I'm saying. And this has always been a problem with Burnham. I talked about this in episode 1. And the fact, I understand she'd get really emotional when she first saw Discovery crew, especially since she's been waiting for a year. So that moment was fine. But then, I don't know, they just kept going to the point, and especially that heart-to-heart that Burnham had with Saru, and was like, I would be honored to be your number one. I'm like, all right, just, you're at an 11, bring it down to at least an 8, okay? It's like, I know Picard and Riker had moments like that, but they were at an 8, not at 11. Bring it down. It's not just that scene, by the way. There's pretty much a lot of scenes in here, and I do like the dynamic between Burnham and Book. Or Booker, apparently. I thought his name was Book, but they're calling him Booker in this episode. But whatever. It doesn't matter. Booker makes more sense. Anyway, the dynamic between these two characters are very interesting. And to be honest, I wouldn't mind if they form a romance. They're definitely hinting at that. And there's a couple of cases where I'm just like, no, don't do that here. I wouldn't mind. I'm not shipping them. I'm like, oh, they better get together. But I wouldn't mind if they did. It doesn't bother me either way because they have a really good kinship and a really good chemistry. That much I'll admit. And I think they did work on that part really well. The chemistry did work. And I do like the character of Booker. And I hope this isn't the last time we see him, and I suspect it won't be. And I think even though he made fun of this in season 1, episode 1, how he was such an obvious like Han Solo ripoff stereotype, I still think, but that's an interesting. I think that plays more interesting once you bring him on Discovery, which is a typical Starfleet ship and all these Starfleet officers. They better be going somewhere with Detmer. I still don't know what they're doing, and here she was just kind of acting like scared of everything. So is it PTSD? Like what? Come on, please get onto what the hell is happening with her. And I think like I officially don't like Giorgio. I thought her conversation with Booker was kind of like, I don't know. I'm starting to not like this character. And what the hell is her deal? And how can they do a Section 31 show if she's in the 30th century? So it makes me think they're going to find some way to send her back to the 23rd century. I don't know. Don't know about any of that. So anyway, my rating for People of Earth out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. Another good, decent episode. As I said, that's a good setup. Has me interested to see. They're laying the groundwork for the season 3 storyline. And as I said, I think this is probably the best episode we got so far. In doing so, that's really advancing the story. So, yeah, I'm really interested to see where they'll go. At least more interested than I was in the past couple of weeks. Anyway, that is it for my review of Star Trek Discovery Season 3, Episode 3. I shall be back next week to cover the next episode of Discovery and every week thereafter. You can also check out my channel as I cover many other shows like all other Star Trek shows and shows like The Expanse, BoJack Horseman, Breaking Bad, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.